back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Financial Survival, brought to you by Discount Gold and Silver Trading. I'm Melody Cedarstrom, and I'm very happy to welcome back to the program James Corbett of the Corbett Report. And as you all know, James is the founder and editor of the Corbett Report, and also the lead editorial writer for the International Forecaster. And of course, that is the weekly newsletter that was created by the recently deceased Bob Chapman. And you can view James's work at thecorbettreport.com. And you can also request your complimentary copy of the International Forecaster just by going to the website, theinternationalforecaster.com. And once again, welcome to the program, James.
Well, very happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, I'm beginning to truly enjoy these. I missed these evening programs for so many years, and I know Alfred always did a great job, and but now I'm beginning to enjoy them. So let's get started right away. We have I have a quick question for you. It's going to be a brief answer, I'm sure, but can you remember a time in history, recent history, that a country, and I'm not even quite sure how to describe this, but a country that has shown such division and hatred towards one man, and of course I mean President Trump, and in addition to the seemingly unrest among its citizens, as we're seeing and we see and experience here in the United States today?
How about Romania 1989?
Okay.
Nicolae Ceausescu? No,
Okay.
That's a little bit of revolution humor for you.
And I'm laughing.
Well, no. I mean, to give you the brief answer that you're looking for, no, it's certainly unprecedented in American politics. There's always the tension, there's always the left-right, there's always the bickering, but obviously things are ratcheted up to such an extreme level today, and I think there are many different reasons why that is, but nevertheless, here we are.
I'm not going to ask for the reasons, but maybe I am. I mean, why all of a sudden? I mean, sure, we can get to, what you can call it, whatever you want, the deep state and so forth. But truly, I mean, this is this just a sign of the times, the desperation from countries that, or maybe even from around the world that are just showing signs of something?
Well, there are a lot of different things that go into this, as I say, and some of them are the kind of big macro level issues, and that's the sort of the cycles of history, as it were, and that's been expressed a lot of different ways. People might have heard of the fourth turning or things like this, where it seems at about an 80-year cycle, which corresponds to 3 or 4 generations, and there seems to be a generational thing that goes into this. But at any rate, there seems to be a rising and ebbing of revolutionary fervor that comes every 80 years or so, and you can go back in American history and follow that pretty predictably for the last few hundred years anyway. So that's an interesting sort of macro phenomenon, and I think we're definitely within that range of it's about time for something to be rising right at the moment. But beyond that, there's economic. That also lines up with some of the economic cycles. I believe the Kondratiev wave and some of those other things that seem to be converging on this time period. But on a social scale, I would say one of the things that feed into this is the rise of the internet. This is something. The form in which we are consuming media and the extent to which we are consuming media is truly unlike any other period of history. People have always read newspapers and things like that, but obviously those were always forms of media that were not immediate, that allowed for space and time and reflection, that were heavily gate-kept, which meant that obviously only certain writers with certain opinions would ever really likely get in front of your face anyway. So there was a lot more control that went on in that respect. We've seen the uncorking of that bottle for all the good that it has given us and all the bad as well. And I think one of the bad sides of that is the filter bubble that so many people are living in to an extent that I think would have been impossible before. I think it would have been impossible for a liberal to only consume liberal media and only hear from liberal people in the past, in the same way it would have been impossible for a conservative to live in such a bubble in the past. But now, you really can live in your own little bubble online and never really have that bubble pricked. Except, of course, for the outrage. I mean, you'll read about, oh, can you believe this person said that? But you'll only read about it from the sources that you like in the first place. So that is contributing to a type of division, a widening of that division that I think is also a contributory factor to what we're living through right now.
You meant, the internet. I mean, everybody knows, everybody talks about that you can't believe everything you see on the internet, but yet everybody believes everything they see on the internet and read. Not everyone. I don't. I know where I get my items, and that I read and research and so forth. And but yet, if it's there, I mean, I have seen, the pictures anymore, the videos anymore, the YouTubes anymore. You can see how people can, get caught up in this this time of confusion. And you're right. They've created their own little bubbles, and you can't prick those bubbles. You can't even get, to try to help people understand. I mean, they are so blinded. It's truly amazing, I think.
It is, and I as always, I don't want to exempt myself or anyone else from this. It affects all of us, and to a certain extent, we need bubbles of some sort, because we can't just take in all the information from every side all the time. It's impossible to do so. We have to have some form of filter as, oh, this is reliable, or I'll look at this and I won't look at that because I know it's going to be a waste of my time. The question is always, well, is that a set filter that has been, hardwired into place that you'll never change? And if so, that could be a problem. And again, it's not a problem that's easily solved, especially because just by the nature of the technology that we have at our disposal now and the way that it's being incorporated into our life, it's unlikely anytime soon that this is going to, we're not going back to the era of newspapers and magazines and things. We're here at this point. The question is, what do we do with it? And how do you prick people's bubbles, introduce ideas from outside of their filter that will somehow get through all of the spin that they're used to? And that is, in some ways, that's kind of the entire purpose of what I do at the Corbett Report. The funny thing is, when I started the website, I envisaged it being deeply unpopular, and I envisioned it generally constantly fighting battles against people who, what, you don't believe the official government story of 9/11? You're a crazy quack, or whatever. The strange thing, for the thing that I wasn't expecting, was that, in fact, over the years, the vast majority of people who listen to my program agree with a lot of the things I say. Of course, they disagree with this or that, and they'll make it certainly well known, but they tend to agree with a lot of the things that I thought would have been the controversial things that would have been pricking people's bubbles. So somehow, despite the fact the Corbett Report is meant as a bubble pricking device, I'm not sure it necessarily does that. So there is always the question, well, am I just preaching to the choir? But no, the choir is growing. I know it is growing. I can see that from the 11 years I've been doing this now. I can see there are more and more people who, the types of ideas that I talked about that would have been controversial a decade or two ago are getting more and more mainstream. So I know the bubble pricking is happening. But how? How do people encounter new information that fundamentally changes their viewpoint? It's a fascinating question, and I think that's probably why the most common question I get, especially when I'm doing an interview for the first time, is, how did you get into all of this? Obviously, I wasn't born a crazy conspiracy theorist. Obviously, there were things and events and pieces of information that got me here, and it's always interesting to hear how people get to this information, because most people do live most of their lives in the filter bubble.
What happens when those bubbles are pricked and they explode? Or will they ever?
Can't it? That's, I think, why we have this this metaphor from, well, I was going to say from the Matrix. I guess it isn't from the Matrix. Well, we have this metaphor of waking up, or, or getting jacked out of the Matrix or whatever. And for a lot of, it's a disorienting experience when some of the things that you took as absolute bedrock, the foundations of your world are taken away, obviously that is a very disconcerting experience, and a lot of people have big problems with that. And some people, I imagine, probably even try to go back to sleep, as it were, after learning problematic pieces of information. Although it's extremely difficult to do that, I don't think I would have been able to do that even if I'd wanted to. So, but it can absolutely completely disorient people, and I think lead to the types of, if not the type of division, at least the sort of extent to which we see division happening in society right now. I think that can be ramped up by people having their worldview shattered, of having the sense of normality gone. People see it as this epic struggle. This is now life and death. I'm suddenly, what's going on? And I think they lash out even harder as a result of that.
And perhaps that's why we're seeing, certain areas of violence creeping up and so forth. Don't know, but it's almost frightening to think of, when it actually happens to a large degree, to a large volume of people and so forth, the outcome that will happen. But let's go on and talk about Helsinki. I think you've been, most likely you've talked about it, and I hope you would like to talk some more about it. Perhaps maybe about the fallout that's coming since Monday's Helsinki summit. Again, it has been unmerciful for the most part in DC, in the press, on social media, the Trump administration. How's it been in Asia, and what has the press and everything over there been saying?
Well, I think, again, this is covering it from the perspective of NATO and what this means ultimately for the NATO alliance. I think that's kind of the bigger geopolitical issue from the foreign perspective, and a lot of what people are looking at right now, especially, of course, in the wake of the brouhaha within NATO about the 4% of GDP and all of that. So I think this is just a follow-on from that, from the foreign perspective. I've obviously seen a lot of the American media response, and this is the worst moment of any president ever kind of thing that's been playing out in your media. Over here, it's kind of what's the bigger picture of this, and what does it mean in terms of things like the NATO alliance, and what does that mean specifically in East Asia with regards to the Asian security situation. It's a couple of steps to get from here to there, though, and one of the most interesting takes I saw on Helsinki before it happened was the floating of the possibility of, well, what if what we are about to see is the kind of tectonic shift, the thing that would have been unthinkable just a few months ago even. What if it's going to be a U.S.-Russian alliance, economic or maybe military or geostrategic, against China? And that's intriguing to me, because I do see, I've talked about the historical parallels with the build-up to World War I. I did a presentation in Denmark last year, Echoes of World War I, that people should look up if they haven't seen it, where I was talking about all of the different parallels between the build-up to World War I and what we're seeing right now with the China-U.S. tensions. So, of course, 100 years ago, it was rising Germany, and Britain was getting pretty nervous about that. So we saw some things happening diplomatically in the run-up to World War I that would have been unthinkable even just a year or two before they happened, like the Triple Entente, the alliance of Britain and Russia and France was a kind of crazy alliance in some ways. It was, again, something that people, even a couple of years before that point, would have thought that's impossible, that'll never happen. But it happened. And it happened specifically because Britain, and specifically the certain parts of the British oligarchy, were preparing for it to take on Germany. And in order to do so, well, they're going to get France and Russia on their side to basically flank Germany. Well, we could see, I mean, it would make some sort of strategic sense if, for example, if the Trump administration really did see China as the enemy, as is indicated by some of the people who are populating the Trump administration. It would make some sense to have a strategic alliance with Russia against China, because Russia and China, although they are neighbors, are certainly have not had a history of pleasant relations with each other, at least since the 1960s, and they have been forced into each other's arms to a certain extent over the last several years by being basically both targets of the US and NATO. But if Trump turned around and said, hey, maybe we can buddy up, and will sort of woo you away from China, that could be a beneficial relationship in that sense. I mean, if we're looking at the 2D geopolitical chessboard, it would be an interesting move to make. We obviously didn't see such a grand announcement or anything of the sort. I wouldn't expect we would, but if this is the first steps towards something like that, that would be interesting, but of course also worrying, because again, the parallel is to the buildup of World War One.
Well, Russia, they've been dumping U.S. treasuries. And this was, in the months before the meeting with President Trump. And we know that Russia ranks among the top 10 foreign holders of U.S. Treasury bills. And I was kind of amazed at some of these numbers. There was the monthly report issued by the Department of the Treasury yesterday showed that Russia in May fell below the $30 billion minimum necessary for inclusion on the government's monthly list of major Treasury holders. And it shows that, and I didn't realize, let me pull up these numbers here. Their holdings have fluctuated in recent years, though, and they ran as low as $7.4 billion in March of 2007 and as high as $175 billion in July of 2010. And now we're, floating at, again, those low levels. So actually, they kind of helped us during the Great Recession. I mean, if they went from 7.4 in 2007 to 175 in 2010.
Well, of course, where are you going to flee other than the safety of U.S. Treasuries?
U.S. Treasuries.
So that is the logic of the system. Whenever there's a crisis, the U.S. really does benefit in that sense. And, of course, that's the privilege of being the printers of the world reserve currency. You can print as much paper as you want, and people will be hungry for it, especially during times of crisis. But, of course, it also creates the problem. Well, people realize this is an unstable system. It doesn't benefit us, so they start to move away. And of course, that's why in 2009 we saw the People's Bank of China governor openly advocating, as they have ever since, for the IMF special drawing rights to replace the US dollar as the world reserve currency. And we've seen moves towards that over the last several years. It's a process that will take time, but we're starting to see that. And another indication of that, not just Russia going down to, $14.9 billion in holdings now, but China's holdings of treasuries declined by almost $200 billion over several months. Yes. So, again, this is a move away from U.S. treasuries.
And we're moving away into a new break, and we'll be right back right after these few short messages. Just one more time. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Financial Survival. I'm Melody Cedarstrom, and I'm here with my guest, James Corbett. And going into the break, we were talking about the amount of treasuries that Russian President Vladimir Putin's government is busy dumping in the months prior to the meeting in Helsinki with President Donald Trump. And since we're talking about Helsinki, and I think it was Tuesday night in an interview, because this kind of goes along with the NATO topic, President Trump again stirred up some, fury, I guess, among the NATO nations. But this time he was questioning the wisdom of the alliance's collective defense terms. And he warned that it's potentially risky because of the tiny country, Montenegro. And he used that country as an example. It has 630,000 people, but Trump warned they may get aggressive, and congratulations, you are in World War III, he said, and that was very unfair. So what's his concern, and why even the comment? I mean, he took credit for increasing the money flow into NATO. Should NATO be dissolved and let each country in the world fend for themselves?
Absolutely, yes. NATO should be dissolved, and not because it's just the other countries aren't paying their fair share. It's because it is, in every sense, an anachronistic institution that there's not even a theoretical need for at this point in time, and it really is the undergirding of a military empire, the likes of which the world has never seen. People, I think, probably don't understand the extent to which NATO has expanded over the last couple of decades, to the point where North Atlantic Treaty Organization means absolutely nothing. It has partnerships all over the world, including here in Asia. Korea is South Korea is one of the global partners of NATO and all of this. So they have their fingers everywhere in the world. It is essentially a global military police force. And it doesn't spread sunshine and lollipops and rainbows. And Article 5 is particularly important. I mean, if nothing else, I would hope that Article 5 at least gets scrapped, because it is a collective suicide pact or collective genocide pact, or whichever side of the coin lands on. It's not good news. And Article 5, for those who don't know, is the collective self-defense clause of NATO. If any NATO nation is attacked, then all NATO nations will spring to the defense. Well, okay, I mean, it makes sense in some sense as a collective security agreement, but do you know the only time Article 5 has ever been invoked?
Oh, I read that earlier today. You're testing my memory, but why don't you just tell us?
NATO invoked Article 5 so that they could go into Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, that's what I was thinking.
17 years ago, where they still are today, of course, and will probably still be 17 years from now because of the geostrategic importance of Afghanistan. Of course, it has nothing whatsoever to do with their fear that Afghanistan was going to take over Europe or anything of the sort. It was all about, of course, the Bin Laden boogeyman and that story, which was used to invoke Article 5. There's actually a fascinating story behind that, where the invocation of Article 5 was done on the basis of a secret briefing that NATO countries received in the wake of 9/11 that supposedly had secret information about don't worry, we can prove to you guys that it was Bin Laden, and therefore that it was Afghanistan, and therefore that we should invade Afghanistan. Again, it doesn't make any sense. But actually, I have some interesting information I'm going to be reporting on very soon about that secret briefing and what it actually contained, and the fact that it did not contain any proof of Bin Laden's culpability in 9/11. But anyway, that is the one and only example of it ever actually being used. But of course, it is always the threat on the table that if anything happens in any of these NATO countries and they point the finger at anyone they want, they can use it to wield the sword of NATO against their enemies. And so you could imagine any kind of destabilizing event. Imagine something happening in Turkey and suddenly Syria is the enemy and we have to go after Syria. It could be used in so many different ways, and I think Trump is right to say, congratulations, World War III. It could very well happen. In fact, I think that would be one of the most likely ways it would happen, would be the invocation of NATO Article 5.
Very interesting. When you're talking about their power and their police, I came across an article today that I thought was interesting, and it takes us to the special forces. And I haven't seen a lot of articles or information on this and so forth. But this was from it was by Nick Terse and Tom Engelhart, and it was Special Ops, 133 countries down, 17 to go. And it talks about these elite forces, and they aren't just elite forces anymore. They're America's secret military. And they are increasingly deployed to something startlingly close to all the countries on the planet, aside from a few obvious ones like the big ones, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. But they are raiding and fighting from Syria to Afghanistan, Somalia, to Niger. They're training allied special op types. They even went in there to help with the 12 Thai soccer players and their coach. And so, I mean, it's huge. And they're going into these areas. Half of Congress doesn't know about where they're at, where they're fighting. There was 4 soldiers that were killed. I can't remember the exact place, South Africa, not too long ago, the beginning of this year. And others have been killed in various other places and wounded and so forth. Is that anything? Is it just, why are they concentrating in Africa? And I know Africa has the minerals. It's just fascinating.
It is fascinating. It's scary, really, because what this is a sign of is the cancer that is festering underneath the surface that is called the deep state or the shadow government or whatever you want to call it. Any and every opportunity to cover over the things that are happening under the cover of secrecy, national security, it's secret, you can't know about it, will be used to expand that shadow government out. And so we really can but dimly comprehend, and only kind of grasping it from the outside, just sort of feeling the shape of the elephant blindfolded, we can understand how big the elephant is, but we don't have a proper grasp on the real numbers of it. But this is just one aspect of that. I think the cancer really started to metastasize with the passage of the National Security Act in 1947 and the creation of the CIA and all of that. But this is another aspect of it. Of course, even before the CIA, there was military intelligence. That's where the CIA grew out of in the first place anyway. And the special forces and all of this is just another form of trying to put a cover over so that you can screen what you're actually doing. So how big is it really? We can only get glimpses of it here and there. But we get spectacular glimpses of it when there is some sort of major problem or disaster, or at least ones that they can't cover up, like earlier this year when one of the Green Berets died in Papua New Guinea. Like, what was going on there? Why are they there? It was an Okinawa-based Special Forces soldier who died in Papua New Guinea. What's going on? Yeah, so we only get it from the outside, and we can only, in that sense, extrapolate from what we know about what they're doing. And yeah, there seems to be a lot of Special Forces activity in Africa. Well, obviously, Africa is becoming a more contentious area as China moves in, trying to extract the resources through trade, and the U.S. has been hankering for at least a decade since the creation of AFRICOM to get a military toehold in the continent so they can continue to do what they do best, which is extract resources at the end of the barrel of the gun. But they still don't have a military base, per se, proper in Africa, so they have to do a lot of special forces work, and I think that's why we see a lot of that coming out there. But where else are they? What other places are they engaging in, and what types of activities? Again, that only comes to the surface in spectacular stories like the Green Beret that died in Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I'd like to find out a little bit more about it, but thank you for commenting on that. Also, there was a lot of news yesterday on Tuesday. There was a lot of news, a lot of comments to the reporters from President Trump, but he said that the talks with North Korea are going very, very well, but that there is no hurry on the denuclearization process. He said that there's no time limit on the process. Is this normal? Is this good? Is it bad?
Well, in terms of diplomatic speak, I think we would expect that. I don't think anyone wants to paint themselves into a corner, or I think that's generally how diplomatic situations work. I mean, I guess no one can really say with this North Korean situation that anything is really normal, status quo. But generally, I think in a diplomatic situation, you're not going to paint yourself into a corner and put some deadline on things, as long as things are progressing. And there is some sense that you're coming towards some sort of deal. So that doesn't particularly surprise me. The real question, I think, is what is actually being discussed at these meetings, and what kind of progress is or isn't being made, and what kind of deals are or are not being made. And I think that's the kind of thing that will probably only be made known to the public years later by someone writing a tell-all, and even that tell-all will be heavily screened by the appropriate intelligence services and State Department and all of that. So, to be a fly on the wall during these types of talks.
Oh, I know it.
But,
I know it.
We can only, again, come at it from the outside.
Should people be concerned that there was, I guess there was the interpreter between Putin and President Trump, that there was an interpreter, and I do believe Putin did have the conversation recorded. Should Americans be concerned because we have no recording of the meeting that was said for those 2 hours, that the two alone? I mean, oftentimes you can have, leaders go off to the side and, talk 5, 10, 15 minutes. But
well, if there really is no record, I mean, again, can you take any of this without a huge grain of salt? Who really knows? And do you think the U.S. would really enter into a situation? I mean, they tap everyone on the planet at all times. I can't believe they don't have a way of getting that. I mean, hey, maybe Trump just had an iPhone in his pocket, so the NSA has it all anyway. You know what I mean? But yeah, I guess so. But even if there was, I mean, I'm sure there is a recording, but we're never going to hear it. Unless, of course, some, intelligence agency wants to strategically leak some part of the conversation to some, New York Times or what have you in order to make some story. Again, those are the only ways that type of information ever filters down to the public anyway.
I saw another headline today, and it was the Israeli army is preparing for invasion of Gaza. They've been fairly quiet. It's been, they've been kind of out of the news and so forth. Any concerns there, or is this just more of the same?
Well, there is always, I think, an ongoing concern, but I will reserve judgment until whatever happens actually happens, because you could have made that headline and written that story at any point in the last 15, 20 years, probably as long as I've been alive. You could have made that headline and it would have been as true then as it is today. Again, until something happens, I'm not sure we can necessarily count those eggs until they hatch. But again, we know that there have been strategic operations that involve targeting civilians and strafing them and killing children on the beach and all of that stuff, time and time again in recent years. And the interesting part of all of that is that public opinion has started to shift away from just knee-jerk, whatever happens, defending Israel, to there has been some unfavorable coverage and some unfavorable things that surprisingly got out with regards to, for example, the invasion of Gaza in, 2012, where we started to see some of the atrocities that were being committed actually being reported even in mainstream sources. So I think there is a difference at this point. I think Israel is a little bit more aware of the fact that they need the PR on their side. So I think that might be a bit of a break. But then again, now that Trump is in power, and Trump is a 110% supporter of Israel, and Bibi Netanyahu is the best guy in politics and all of this stuff, maybe that calculus is changing.
Quick question. He's back. Obama, in his first major speech since leaving office, he wants to endorse the idea of providing a universal basic income. He says that we're going to have to, if we're going to worry about economics, if we want to get democracy back on track, we need to have the universal basic income. What say you?
Universal basic income is a nightmare waiting to happen. It's one of those ideas that sounds good, and I get the idea of it, but all it ever means is the government will provide for you, it will wrap you in its loving arms and provide you this money if you jump through the right hoops, if you're good enough. And just look to China and what they're doing with their social credit system, and you get points if you're pro-government, you get docked points if you're against the government, and they are now literally banning people from taking airplanes or buses or trains because they aren't pro-government enough. I mean, that's the type of power you are putting in the government's hands when you give them the power to say, okay, you can be part of this program, we'll give you the income, as long as you say the right things, as long as you don't go to protests, as long as you're a good citizen. And that's exactly where this is ultimately heading.
And that is also frightening, because most people think it's a great idea. A lot of people think it's a great idea. They don't see that they don't see what can happen. So we're just about out of time. I want to do any closing thoughts you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, I'll just invite people to stay tuned to CorbettReport.com. I'm always working on new information and episodes and reporting and stuff. I've mentioned some of it already, and in fact, I'm going to be expounding a little more on that filter bubble idea in the near future, so people can stay tuned for that as well. All of my work available for free at CorbettReport.com.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I heard there was record rainfall in western Japan in early this month. Is that...
Absolutely incredible torrential downpour, flooding all around the area where I'm at. Luckily, myself and my family were spared, but there's been flooding, and friends of friends are now essentially homeless. I'm going to help with some of the cleanup tomorrow, so it's just an incredible situation.
I had no idea it was close to where you were at. So please be safe, and prayers for you and your friends and family that have been affected. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. Until tomorrow, be safe, good night, and God bless.
The Corbett Report is brought to you by you. Your support makes the Corbett Report possible. Sign up for the subscriber newsletter or purchase a DVD at corbettreport.com/support.